Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I apologize if there is any noise in the background. Unfortunately, there's quite a heavy rainstorm that seems to have come out of nowhere, and it's quite loud on my end, but hopefully you can't hear it too much. Today, I'm joined by Makone Maja. Makone, how are you doing?
Hey Nick, good to be back. Thanks for having me.
And also by Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you?
No, it's been a while, eh?
Indeed, good to have you back. Right, so let's start off with what is probably the breaking news of today. I know the algorithm absolutely loves talking about ESCOM, but we're going to shelve that for today before I go mad. And we're going to talk about some information that's come to light as a result of a DA request using the Promotion of Access to Information Act to the South African Revenue Service. The DA sent this information request to SARS saying they wanted a copy of the form that was used to declare the 500,000 US dollars plus was brought into the country and was stolen from Ramaphosa's farm. So for those of you who can't remember all the details, Ramaphosa and the Phala Phala scandal, there are questions about why he didn't report a robbery at his farm. $500,000 was allegedly given to him to purchase some buffalo by a Sudanese businessman. That was then, for some reason, stored underneath the pillows of a couch rather than in a safe, and was subsequently stolen by some people who broke in. You may have known this due to inside information. That money, it appears, was never declared to the tax service. So when you have a certain amount of foreign currency that you're bringing into the country, you have to declare it to SARS. The Sudanese businessman who brought it in originally claimed that he had declared it, that he had, his name was Mustafa, he claimed that he had signed a form, but he refused to show it to anyone. And as far as SARS is concerned, they have no copy of any declaration form that was made proving that this money was declared. So in other words, the money was illegal, and it was being stored underneath a couch, allegedly for the purpose of purchasing some buffalo, which even after being purchased, apparently stayed on Ramaphosa's farm for an additional 2 years. So, let me start with you, Terence. This Phala Phala scandal, it's been interesting to watch because of at every sort of stage, to me, it kind of seems as though it's gotten a little bit worse with the president. When it first came to light, it sounded like, oh, this might just be nonsense from Arthur Fraser, because it came to light, of course, because Arthur Fraser, the former correctional services head, laid charges against Ramaphosa for not allegedly reporting this crime. It kind of just seemed like a sort of an odd thing to accuse someone of. Oh, he's getting in trouble for not reporting himself being robbed. But as things have progressed, there's been a sort of drip of like weirder and weirder details. Why was it stored under a couch? What was he doing business with this businessman? Was the deal above board? What was the money going to be used for? Stuff like that. In terms of Ramaphosa's image, how damaging do you think Phala Phala has been?
Well, I think that stuff like this can land you in jail, get you into a great deal of trouble. We tend to see crime as something that involves some sort of guy with a ski mask on wielding a gun. But this sort of more white collar evasion of regulations and things like that, it's serious and it's got teeth. Remember, Al Capone didn't go to jail for being the premier gangster in 1920s and 30s Chicago. He went because they got him on tax. So yeah, this is potentially a very serious one. Does it compromise Ramaphosa in the eyes of the public? Now that's a different thing. And my sense of it is probably not, because this is not the kind of thing most of us engage with. It's not the kind of thing that most of us instinctively or intuitively think of as crime. We've seen some commentators who are generally very sympathetic to the president. I'm thinking of Melanie Verwoerd, for instance. Who've tried to sort of talk this into talk the square peg into a round hole, that well, maybe there's, maybe you didn't know about it. Maybe. Um, no, look, I think there's definitely questions to be answered. Um, there are people who've had sums like that confiscated, and have not been able to get them back. So this is not a small thing. And as you say, the progression of details just seems to, every revelation just seems to compound the last. The whole, okay, you take it out of a safe and you put and you put it under a couch. If you go and search down the back of my couch, you find a couple of stale chips and maybe 20 cents. Apparently, in certain game lodges, you find a lot more. But then, maybe it's also just because, our standard of political morality is so dreadfully low that something that essentially amounts to a case of fraud against SARS just doesn't really register with us.
So I have some thoughts on this, which is that what's striking to me about this is, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's some attempts now to kind of push this further and see Ramaphosa maybe face some kind of legal punishment. Both I think there's people in the opposition and civil society are quite keen on that. But I don't know. I think that there's definitely, I can see Ramaphosa kind of pinning this all on the fall guy, the guy who Sylvester and Globo, who apparently stashed the money under the cushions and things, as taking the fall for this, and him never really getting in legal trouble. But I'm not sure entirely if I agree with you, Terence, about it not having that much political impact, or at least in how ordinary people see him. Because for me, what I think it does is the oddness of it, the kind of weird behavior, the fact that there's like no kind of obvious explanation for this. It makes Ramaphosa, who was up till now the clean, shiny knight in armor who's going to save the ANC and the country from certain destruction, it just kind of puts a bit of muck on everything. It just feels weird. It just feels bad. It kind of brings that miasma of corruption around the president, which didn't exist before. Makone, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with me, or what's your take here?
I think it depends on who you're comparing Ramaphosa to. If you're comparing him against his own record, then sure, this taints the sort of stellar, clean president image that he had preserved up until, of course, Palapala. But if you compare him to, again, what Terence, I believe, referred to as the political morality of this country, it's far worse. This is...
Yeah, no, it's not quite Zuma levels of stuff, is it?
No. And I was going to bring up the rape charges that now seem so far back in our memory. But if you compare him against the record of other politicians within the ANC, he still comes across as more honest. And again, I think to Terence's point, white collar crimes aren't quite as damning as maybe like it's actually blue collar crimes. But I will say that any opportunity for me to praise or give a credit to South African political and legislative institutions, I will seize, because first you have to acknowledge that SARS actually did their work and looked into this. If you actually see the headline, you'll notice there's a qualifier in there. They say SARS did not find the money, or it could not, right? It's either the money is there and they can't find it, or so there's a qualifier in there, but still you have to give SARS kudos for actually looking into this. So we're not quite as corrupt as could be. And on the legislative reinforcement side, PAIA works, right? Because essentially this came out of John Steenhuisen calling out the Sudanese businessman's bluff, because when he solicited or requested that the form through which this money was sent through the country be provided to him, the Sudanese businessman declined to offer it to John Steenhuisen. And so he pursued it further. Good on him, good on his instincts to pursue it further using PAIA. And again, he was able to actually be provided with the information, even though it did not produce the actual $580,000. So kudos to these political and legislative institutions in South Africa that still work. Would like to see far more, because it actually reminds me of one of the reasons the Financial Asset Task Force brings up as to why South Africa is grey listed, right? It's politically exposed persons not being persecuted, and this is definitely one of them. They make mention of state capture, but I would say this Palapala case could come to a money laundering issue. I don't know. Of course, this is all speculative, but I could easily see it fitting into one of the reasons why South Africa will continue to remain on the grey list.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Actually, your point about things like power working, it is heartening to see, and I suspect it's part of that the reasons why South Africa is often more resilient, I think, than the sort of on paper would suggest that it's going to be. Terence, any final thoughts on this?
No, I think Makone summed it up very well. We do have, we do have more robust tools than many other societies. The danger, of course, is that when a venal political elite feels threatened, its instinct and its incentive is then to blunt them. But yeah, the system does seem to be working, to the consternation of some people within that system.
Indeed so. All right, let's move on to our next topic, and this is one that very greatly concerns me. So I've been going on this whole year about the dangers caused, I think, by the rise in the assassinations, particularly political assassinations, and the use of hitmen in general. And a related topic, but not quite the same, is political violence. Now, South Africa is a very violent society, as I'm sure everyone knows, not just from our crime stats, but we've had lots of labor-related violence, lots of strike violence, that kind of thing. And we have had quite a fair amount of political violence too. However, a lot of it was really kind of localized in kind of the out-of-the-way areas. It wasn't in the sort of political mainstream. It wasn't in the public view. It was always like in the rural areas. It was always at usually quite a low level between, like, for example, IFP and ANC people in KZN. But what I'm very concerned about is the normalization of political violence in our public sphere. So I will read from just two stories very briefly, and then Makone, I'll come to you with your thoughts. The first is that we saw UCT students protesting about not being able to register their own fees to the university a while ago, and now we're seeing WITS students join it, and indeed it seems to have been taken to another level. I can't remember whether during Fees Must Fall they ever marched to the Vice-Chancellor Adam Habib's house, but I don't quite remember it. Maybe I'm wrong. But apparently the students are marching to the Vice-Chancellor's house now, and there are even, according to the university, some threats to burn down the Vice-Chancellor's house if he does not succumb to their demands, such as essentially allowing students who haven't paid 150,000 Rand in fees to register. At the same time, there was a little bit of fluff on social media following the post by the EFF's Mpumalanga leader, who's also an MPL in Mpumalanga, Colin Sudebe, who posted a picture of himself holding a semi-automatic rifle in one hand, and the caption was, "By all means necessary or possible, we are ready at EFF South Africa," was the caption that he put on it. So, as is typical of the mainstream, the point was last year, where everyone started arguing about, should he be posting pictures with his gun, which is not what is the problem here. The problem here is that he said that he is willing to overthrow the government with violence, or at least that's one interpretation of what he said. I mean, it was nice and suitably vague, so I'm sure to avoid any kind of legal problems. But this is not rare for the EFF, as I'm sure all of our listeners know. The EFF often flirts with these very, shall we say, aggressive rhetoric, which normalizes political violence, as far as I'm concerned. Makone, what's your take on these two stories and the problem of political violence in general? Your thoughts?
On the EFF side, I hope the legality of this post is pursued, because they've sort of hiked things from just violent rhetoric to now brandishing weapons accompanied by suggestive, you could even argue, incitement of violence-esque posts. So I really hope the legality of this is pursued, because I think the court would actually find that incitement of violence by means of a social media post with what some people conclude as seemingly benign, something like this could result in actual violence ensuing, especially leading up to the march that the ESF is planning on the 20th to protest service delivery in the country. So I really hope that people will not let this slide, because this has escalated far beyond just violent rhetoric. And with the WITS SRC, I was actually commending them the second last time I was here for being the one consistent SRC that will go and raise money for its students instead of just protesting. But it's quite disappointing for me to observe that student protests have not evolved past like 1970s and 80s arsonist techniques to more civilized, based on discourse, above board negotiations. And if you actually look at some of the way WITS has handled this particular protest, they've been very forthcoming with being open about how the negotiations are going behind the scenes. I'm not sure why the students feel it's necessary to escalate to go as far as threatening to burn down a vice chancellor's homestead. But yeah, it's been very disappointing to me that student protests are not evolving to more like boardroom setting instead of toying and threatening to burn down people's houses. It's just a relic of like 1986 student protests.
And we do apologize there for the very loud thunder in the background. We seem to be in the middle of a Joburg thunderstorm. Terence, your thoughts on these two stories?
Some years ago, I remember, and I can't remember exactly where I read this, but somebody said that one of the problems with Thabo Mbeki was that he didn't have a flamboyant revolutionary biography. And I think there's an irony in our political culture that the veneration of the armed struggle didn't match anything that actually happened. South Africa's liberation movement was, in that sense, extremely ineffective. You know, if you compare the ANC's armed struggle to Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, it was effective politically, but even the ANC would concede in the early 90s that they didn't really have a snowball's chance in hell of overthrowing the government. They just didn't have the means, the force, the organization to do it. But that has become sort of ingrained into discourse news. And towards the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, you saw that candidate admission that this was never really a major thing, falling away to being, yes, this is how we beat the Boers. We overthrew the state. It's a piece of political mythology, and I think the problem is that it's ingrained itself into the political culture, and it's been romanticized, and it's also been tolerated. The use of violence, not on a scale of what we saw in the early 90s and the feuding between the ANC and the IFP, but certainly disrupting other parties' meetings, burning down the shack of somebody who supports the wrong party, all of that sort of thing has been rumbling on. We've never quite got over the political assassination, to the point now that that's seen as kind of, well, it's politics by other means. It's a romantic statement, romantic until someone is actually killed, at which point we sort of we all disclaim, oh no, that's not quite what we meant when we said kill. We actually meant take him out for a beer and explain to him. So yeah, when I see Mr. Sidibe holding what looks like a zip gun in the one photograph, and what actually looks like an AK, proper AK, which I'd be interested to know if that is legal, because I know those things are very, very difficult to have licensed in South Africa. What exactly is it that that you're communicating. And when somebody does open fire and cites you as the inspiration, what is the what is the turnaround? No, I didn't mean now. I can talk about this for a long time. If we go back to, I think it was about 2008, 2009, Zwelinzima Vavi said at a funeral that killing is always an option. And he was very, very clear about this. The Human Rights Commission was then approached, and of course they found this a very embarrassing and difficult thing to deal with. So they came out with this very wishy-washy statement done in collaboration with Mr. Vavi that said, well, he's not saying that it's that he's going to kill anyone now, but that's sort of an option, and we're okay with that. If an organization, whose sort of central point is the protection of life and dignity, can say, well, it's not too bad, and we kind of get where he's coming from. Are there really any major guardrails on this?
That's a very good point. Makone, any final thoughts on this?
Just that I actually, to what Terence said earlier about the revolutionary of the ANC, read an autobiography by ANC stalwart and veteran who's now since deceased, Ibrahim. I think it's called Beyond Freedom. And in it, he actually makes those concessions, Terence, about how clumsy they actually were in trying to overthrow the government, and how they actually didn't succeed much. Because of lack of organization, and just how much a mammoth of a task it is to overthrow a government as competent as the apartheid regime. But somehow these messages and even these techniques or their condemnation is not reaching student protests even now, some 30, 26, 7 years later.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But I think in a way, we might have been able to put that behind us if we actually had a proper war, because maybe then people wouldn't see this as some sort of political statement, but as something where actual suffering takes place. People that I've met who actually are combat veterans have very little positive to say about it. These are sometimes people who were professional soldiers, chose this as a career. You may love the army, but geez, there's nothing particularly nice about shooting and killing other people.
I will also point out that the ANC's most successful president was the one who, as you mentioned, Terence, had sort of the least revolutionary baggage, being Thabo Mbeki, under whom we actually saw an expansion of services and good economic growth and financial surplus. All things that we wistfully long for now. And the ANC seems not even vaguely capable of producing nowadays. Anyway, let's go on to our next story. And this one, I don't know how much there is to say about it, but it's just, I want to kind of just ask you guys to maybe speculate a bit, which is, why is it taking so long to reshuffle the cabinet? Ever since the ANC's elective conference in December, we've seen promises from the executive that there's going to be some sort of reshuffle in the ANC, all of these kind of off-the-record sources saying, oh, no, don't worry, it's coming. This is going to reflect all the new realities of the ANC's political structure, will be reflected in their position in government. Also, there are new people who are going to be added, like the electricity minister that Ramaphosa has promised in his State of the Nation. There's a variety of things like that, which, a lot of them I think are not actually particularly important to ordinary South Africans, because as far as I'm concerned, the cabinet is of a mostly sort of equal quality, that being not very good. And yet, it is still a key thing, particularly for Ramaphosa's political fortunes, I think, to be able to kind of reshuffle a cabinet, manage it, weigh competing factions against each other. And yet it's taken a very long time. I mean, it's literally been months of discussion about this, which is unusual, because normally once a cabinet reshuffle is mentioned, everyone kind of starts running around with their head on fire, hoping to get into a good position. And it's done within a week or two. But instead, we've seen this kind of long, drawn-out floating of some ideas in the media through anonymous sources, floating of other ideas. But It's gotten so bad that Ramaphosa or his office is apparently committed to this evening finally doing the reshuffle. That's been long awaited. I've never seen sort of a a government plan in the promise in the media. No, don't worry, we really will do it, and in fact, it'll be tonight. And all sorts of excuses have been given along the way, such as that Ramaphosa is suffering from a cold, although apparently he was at Phala Phala doing an auction on Friday, which has gotten some blowback. Makone, let me start with you. Why is the president so sort of disconnected, do you think? Why is he not getting
I
ahead?
think
Is this just ANC politics?
I think he may be plagued by that interpersonal conflict that's sort of been on him his entire presidency, which is to act in the best interest of the country or the party, right? And I think that also finding a cabinet that's capable, finding a meritocracy, right, to lean to a point when you're appointing the cabinet is one that will be a difficult one for him. But we do have a commitment, and that is tonight. I'm particularly interested to see if the cabinet grows bigger or smaller, who stays and who goes. Those kind of questions are what really interests me. But I'm also interested to see if he will appoint a pragmatic cabinet, people that will come in regardless of their political affiliations, regardless of their race. Highly unlikely. I know I'm whistling past the graveyard with this one, but I'm hoping that he will appoint a suitable cabinet to the country's current service delivery economic crises.
If you're willing to bet money on that, I'll definitely
No,
take the opposite view.
no.
Terence, any thoughts on this?
Well, Makone hit the nail on the head. Is this about the country or the party? And I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and say this is always about the party. And I think that's South Africa's key problem. President Ramaphosa, I think, first and foremost sees himself as the leader of a party, and I think there's a certain degree of hubris that you find throughout the ANC that that simply believes that there is no and will never be any alternative to the ANC. And so, your job is to sort of play musical chairs with political appointments and with positions in the civil service. That, by the way, is I think where the key weaknesses. I don't think that we have a stellar quality of cabinet minister. I don't think the pool of talent is particularly deep, but that wouldn't matter too much if we had strong administrators and a civil service, that was staffed with technocrats who knew how to get things done. And this was actually one of the great strengths of Trevor Manuel. For someone old enough to remember him, I was told this actually by a DA MP that he was actually quite clear that he wasn't an economic specialist, but what he did have was a strong coterie of advisors, and he said, "You tell me what needs to be done, but I'll handle the politics." Where he was particularly strong. So he had the expertise he needed, and he brought the political weight, and our finances were well managed over that period. He was also supported, of course, by his president.
Yes, which is always important. Yeah, I will say though that what I take away from this is that the ANC is in a very difficult position in terms of its ability to change course before the 2024 election. I think the current trajectory has it going on a very bad trajectory for its own sake, for its own interests, and that clearly, to me, it doesn't seem like Ramaphosa has anything like the will or the political capital to make even the kind of short-term decisions that might boost his election score. This, to me, is a really bad sign from their perspective on them being able to save themselves before the election. Never mind whether we're going to get good policy or not, because I don't think that's even on the table. All right, Terence, you said you had something to say just before the end?
I just wanted to comment on a personal note left by one of our viewers, Graham Heesum, who was at school with my brother Sean. You would have known Sean to be quite a character, and all I can say is that we miss him very much. And thank you for that, Graham.
Thank you, Terence. And with that, we'll call it for a close to today. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope that you had an interesting time, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.